Hey folks, this time the book we're in chapter 17 now, and this chapter is called Conquering the West, and it does a tremendous amount with the so-called Indian Wars and moving of primarily whites to the American West and settling that particular part of the continent for the United States. Um, and I kind of want to deal with one aspect of Native American issues while we're in this chapter that the book kind of touches on a little bit. Um, but once Native Americans are largely placed on reservations, uh, there's a huge attempt to do what the United States government calls as civilizing this group of people. And uh, in large part to try to do that, the United States government is going to try to strip away Native American culture and get rid of that traditional culture from Native Americans and try to force them into more of an American style of lifestyle. And they do this a couple of ways. One of them is the code is called the Code of Religious Offenses. Basically, this outlaws most Native American religions. The Native Americans had started into practicing a dance called the Sun Dance. Later on, there's a new religious movement that pops up called the Ghost Dance. The Code of Religious Offenses makes both of those illegal, as well as several other traditional Native American religions. That's blatantly against the First Amendment to the United States and the Constitution. Congress is not allowed to make laws inhibiting the free practice of religion. Well, no one's suing and no one is defending so much. I mean, there's a few people, but for the most part, no one's really defending the rights of Native Americans in this. And so the Code of Religious Offenses honestly doesn't really go challenged for the most part. And so, but we are making Native American religions illegal with the Code of Religious Offenses. There's in the I think it's 1990s, there's an adjustment by the United States government that legalizes some other practices by Native Americans. One of the big ones, and it doesn't really matter for us right now, but one of the big ones is it legalizes the use of peyote by Native Americans in some of their religious services. Uh, the peyote had been a sacred plant and it had been an instrumental part of some Native American religions. The use of it, well, it was illegal. And so that law it's sometime in the 1990s, it reallows that by the federal government. So that's Code of Religious Offenses is that one. Another thing that we're going to do is again trying to strip away Native American culture. And these are done at what are called Indian schools. The most famous one is Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. Uh, and what we're going to do here is, it's difficult to change the way of thinking, to change the cultural value, the traditions and stuff among adults. We're kind of set in our ways, and we've had, years and decades of experience practicing these various traditions. And so it's kind of difficult to sort of get an adult to kind of give up on all their traditions and stuff like that. But kids, it's a lot easier to get them shifted out of that. And so Indian schools provide that function. Native American children are taken forcefully sometimes from the reservations and they're distributed at these Indian schools. Like I said, Carlisle is the most famous one up in Pennsylvania. And immediately, we're going to do everything we can to break those kids out of Native American traditions. Uh, and Google some pictures of these. They're really, really interesting. There's a lot of before and after images of Native American kids that went to Carlisle, and you'll see them in the before images, and they're dressed in their traditional buckskin clothing and the males having long hair and stuff like that. And immediately, when you get to Carlisle as a Native American kid, they take away these kids' clothes and they dress them in American style clothing. Now, to make sure that those Native American kids don't go and find that traditional clothing and start dressing like that again, uh, you know, in secret or something like that, immediately those clothes are going to be burned. So the traditional Native American clothing that these kids arrive in, that's going to be stripped away and that's going to be burned. Also, the hair. The hair is going to be cut immediately and to a more American style haircut. Uh, and we're going to get rid of, traditional Native American cuisine's not going to be served there. They're going to really force, eating of American style cuisine. Also, teaching the young ladies how to prepare these American dishes, apple pie and stuff like that. Um, as bad as this is really bad. Don't get me wrong. As bad as this is, though, Carlisle does, and these other Native American schools do have a positive about them. They do educate uh, these Native American kids in industrial information, industrial trades. They also educate them in agricultural issues. So the kids come out and they're able to, seek a Western style job if they would like to move off of the reservation, because the reservation, honestly, the employment opportunities is very, very limited. The tradition of, sort of roaming the American West and hunting buffalo, well, that's gone. Buffalo are largely extinct at this point, and uh, you know, they're all confined to the reservations. And if they do, leave the reservations, the United States military will round them back up very aggressively and take them back. So there's a tiny amount of positivity that comes out of Carlisle, but the trade-off is basically having their culture destroyed, their identity destroyed. And a lot of these kids, really, really sadly, when they return to the reservation, the rest of the community uh, shuns them, because these kids are not traditional Native American kids anymore. They are westernized. They're Americanized, and so they're kind of in this really terrible situation where they don't fully fit in with the sort of the larger American communities, but they also don't fit in with their Native American communities either. And so, but the government's going to aggressively, and it's a misguided kind of gesture in a large part, and also in quite a bit is there's a lot of malevolence, sorry, here, that this is another attempt to try to punish Native Americans and shrink the reservations even more and get rid of their culture and their identity and stuff like that. And so it's just kind of an all around messed up situation. Um, so that's the efforts. There's other efforts as well. The Dawes Act, but the book talks about Dawes Act pretty well. But there's a lot of efforts to really force American culture onto these Native Americans through Carlisle, through the Code of Religious Offenses, through the Dawes Act. There's this big push, and it's just a terrible situation. So, with that, we'll get into some more labor reform next time. So, see you then.